Hey guys, Shelby Smith with Jiminy Crickets coming at you live from the Cricket Castle. Today I'm going to talk to you about a topic that comes up over and over again for either new cricket farmers, new cricket keepers, no matter the size that you are, and that is breeding crickets. It seems to be a really big hang up for everybody who is just starting out, and I've done a few videos about it in the past, but I want to do a more extended one because it just is such a common thread of questions. So hopefully we will get most of the basics covered in this video, and once you've gotten the basics down, the rest of it becomes a lot easier. So stay tuned. So keep in mind that a lot of these things that I go over may seem very obvious, and they kind of are, but sometimes they are overlooked, and sometimes they're not obvious to the brand new cricket farmer or cricket keeper. It doesn't matter if you are keeping a small aquarium full of crickets for your lizard, or if you are looking at raising crickets for yourself so that you can consume, or if you are scaling. Wherever you're at, these basics will remain the same no matter the size you are in terms of breeding your crickets. With that being said, I should give you another warning. It has been a long time since my first crickets, so if anything that I say needs a little bit more clarification, or there's something that you're just like, wait, can you talk a little bit more about that in a future video, please drop a comment below, and I will definitely get back to your comment right away, and then if it takes further elaboration and needs some sort of hands-on explanation, I will absolutely create another video and go over that. So big indicator, basic, rock, whatever you want to call it, number one is your timing. Your timing of breeding obviously is super important. Too early, you've wasted your time, you're not going to get any eggs. Too late, you've wasted your time, you're probably not going to get a lot of viable eggs. So timing is really, really key. So I want to talk about a few different indicators that I look out for in my barn to know that it is definitely time to be breeding crickets. So indicator number one, as you can hear in the Cricket Castle, is chirping. So if you are only keeping one age of crickets, or if you have a barn structured like mine where you are growing the entire generation all within like a few days of hatching, so they're basically all the same maturity, then chirping is a really, really good indicator for the closeness of breeding. But it is not the be-all end-all. So your first chirp does not mean that you need to rush out and put a breeding tray in. We'll talk a little bit more about it later, but chirping is a really good way to keep track. This obviously gets a little more complicated when you have mixed generations. So let's say that you have 2 weeks in between generations, or 1 week in between generations. Chirping may not be a super great indicator for your entire barn. If your barn is silent and then goes to chirping, obviously that first group, you know when it's ready, but then how are you supposed to know when subsequent ages are ready? It's a little bit of an art, a little bit of a science. So the second indicator that I would go with, in addition to the chirping, is you need to know your hatch date, as well as your conditions, all of those things. So what your temperature is and when your hatch date was. So basically you're figuring out how old today are my crickets. Is it reasonable to think that they probably are chirping, even though I have other ones chirping and I'm not totally sure which bins are chirping and which ones aren't? I can default back to my total days to maturity to sort of help me with that decision-making process. So if you know when your first bin, the older ones, started chirping, you know how many days it took to get to that chirping, that should help you inform your decision on the farther bins. This is particularly useful for those of you who are like just starting out and don't know how to look for other certain visual indicators, which we'll talk about next. So indicator number 3, and I honestly would consider this the most important, in terms of my barn and my efficiency as far as getting the most eggs, the most viable eggs out of my females. And that is to watch the females. So the males, typically in my experience, start chirping 4 or 5 days before the females are really ready to start laying eggs. So there's a few reasons for this. One of it is just males always seem to be ready to rock. Goes across species. Totally joking, kind of. But, so the males will start chirping. That doesn't mean that the females have gone through their final molt, have hardened up their exoskeleton, and are ready to breed. The best way to notice if your females are ready is to visually look at them. How would you say that 50% or more of your bin have a not fully formed ovipositor? If that's the case, even if your crickets are chirping away, doesn't matter. You're not ready for a breeding tray yet. You will be too early. But once they've hit that, over 50%, it looks like you're seeing more of the fully formed ovipositors than you're seeing ones that are underdeveloped. Pretty good indicator that things are starting to liven up and your females are probably getting ready. So that's one of the first visual cues to watch. The second thing, particularly if you have brand new housing, so egg flats, cardboard, whatever, if you start to notice that the females are chewing holes, you won't necessarily see that it's the females per se, but just assume that it's the females. If you notice that there is an uptick in the amount of holes that have been chewed in the housing, pretty good indicator that the females are getting restless and are looking for somewhere to lay their eggs. So the final way that I, with my current system, having open bins, no tops on, the big indicator for me when it is absolutely go time as far as the females go is when I walk in my barn, I notice a lot more stray crickets than the previous days. If you look really closely, almost all of those are females and fully developed females. So what that indicates to me is that those ladies are really ready to drop some eggs and are looking for a good place to do it. So when I see an uptick in crickets out, that is the indicator that it is absolutely go time. So, like I said, my biggest and best indicator, it's not the chirping males, it's not necessarily, we have a 45-day life cycle here typically. It doesn't mean that by day 42, 100% of the time, we are putting breeding trays in. Watch your females. Your females will tell you when they are ready. If they are not ready, you are wasting your time. Alright, so now that we've talked about timing and the indicators to look for when your crickets are officially ready to breed, let's talk about substrate. There's lots of different substrates that you can use. The one thing that needs to be consistent across whatever substrate you use is that it needs to be moist. If your crickets are laying their eggs into a dry substrate, those eggs are not going to be viable. So what I like to use is peat moss. So the specific brand of this one, let me see if I can kind of zoom it in, is Majestic Earth. So it's peat moss, 100% organic. I get it at our local home improvement store. I think that's like a 3 cubic foot bale or whatever they call it. Anyways, that is what I like to use. I've messed around with things like potting soil. I've never used coconut coir, but if you can source that cheap, go for it. I know there's others that use wet sand. Lots of different options that you have. My preferred, like I said, is the peat moss. One really big thing with your breeding substrate is your moisture level. Before I filmed this video, I intended to buy, which I don't even think that they probably are very accurate, but I intended to buy one of those like moisture meters that you can stick in houseplants so that like you know when you're overwatering them or not. That's, I guess, one way you could do it. That being said, like I was going to do that as a demonstration. Would have been very helpful for you guys to take a little bit of the art out of it, because I want to talk about the moisture levels that are optimal for your breeding substrate, because that is super, super important as well. If you get it too dry, depending on how long you leave your substrate in your bins, if it's too dry, your eggs are going to dry out. They're not going to be viable. On the flip side, if it is too wet and there's too much additional moisture, your eggs are actually going to rot and they won't hatch either. So it's really a happy medium, and it is more of an art than a science. But like I said, I was hoping for that sensor so that I could give you guys some sort of idea. But anyway, so I'll show you. So this is breeding substrate that is ready to go. Let me see. There's a hole in this bag. So if you look at a comparison, color-wise, this is the peat moss dry, and then that is the peat moss when it is ready to go. So very, very significant difference in color, very significant difference in texture. So this is very, very like dusty, light. I'll just mix it into this so it's no big deal. Dusty and light, very, very dusty. As opposed to the peat moss that is ready to go, if I squeeze this, that's water coming out of it. It's not too much water. I did have to actually put some effort into squeezing it to get the water to come out. So that means I'm not completely saturated to the point that we're gonna have too much moisture in it. That is just enough. It is very delicate balance, more of an art than a science. You don't want too little and you don't want too much. It's like, is it Goldilocks with the porridge? I think so. Anyways, it's like Goldilocks. So, use whatever you want, but make sure that it is moist, but not too moist. Next, I will show you how we put the breeding trays together and a few tips with that. And one other point about the breeding substrate. Whatever you do, do not reuse your breeding substrate. You should be able to source it cheap enough that it makes sense to just get rid of it every time. Compost it. Use it for your garden. Use it for repotting your plants. There's so many things that you can do with it, and it is really, really, really good as a soil amendment once it has been used as a breeding substrate. But there are just too many things that can go wrong if you reuse it. I suppose you probably could freeze it or figure out how to sterilize it some way, but like I said, I just do not recommend reusing it when it is so cheap to source. There's just too many things that can go wrong, and the impact would be too great if those things do go wrong. So don't reuse your substrate. Now I'll show you how we make our trays. Alright, so these are what we use as our breeding trays. They are just aluminum, probably. Cake pans that I got at the Dollar Tree. Hold on just a second. We have multiple sizes, multiple shapes. There's really no rhyme or reason to the sizes or the shapes. It's just what they had in stock. So anything like this will work. The other things you can use, you could use all sorts of different Tupperware, little plastic things, anything like that. Just make sure you scuff up the sides. Although I'll show you a way later that we can deal with that. No big deal. So if you can see this, it's about maybe 2 inches thick-ish, something like that. So I take a scoop, bring over my mixed up breeding substrate, take a scoop and put it in here and just kind of spread it out. And one thing I do want you guys to notice though is that I don't have it all the way up flush to the edge. I give a little bit of head space, about a ½ inch all the way around, that I don't want, you don't want this to be overflowing. And the reason is that the crickets are absolute jerks and will get up here and they will kick it around and kick it out into your bin, eggs and all. So it is really counterproductive if you get these too full. You need to have them full enough that it's a deep enough substrate that the females can really get in there and stick their ovipositor in there and lay the eggs. but not so much that you're allowing them to kick it out. So this is what the ready to go breeding tray looks like. Don't overfill them. And I actually have 30 of those breeding trays to change today, so I have a few more to make. But I do want to show you guys what I was talking about earlier, where you can use the plastic or you know, those when those trays are brand new, they almost have like a film on them that make them very, very slippery for the crickets. That can be worked with. And even after they've rusted up a little bit, or even if we use plastic ones and they're scuffed up a little bit, I'm going to show you what we do as an addition just to make it super easy for the females to be able to lay. And so you can't tell super well, and I can't pull this out a ton more and hold it up and the camera at the same time because I'm not that good. But if you see this right here, so we just have an extra egg flat leaned up against the breeding tray so that the females can get up there easily and get out easily, and so they are happily laying eggs. So these ones are going to come out, and then I'm going to spray them down a little bit, stick them in an incubator, and away we go. So that's just one thing. Whatever you do, remove all barriers from your females to get in and lay their eggs. That is the other thing. Just make it easy. They might be able to get in, but just don't give them an excuse to not be able to.
Excuse me while I change 30 breeding trays. I only managed to dump one of them on my head. So, there was that. It was only one though. And I got most of it out of my hair. And I just left the rest of it on the floor. I'll clean it up later. Never a dull moment. Having some sort of rack like I'm using there, so it's just an empty shelf like I use through the rest of the barn, but having a rack like that where I can easily change out the ones that have had eggs laid in them with the fresh ones makes it so much more efficient.
Alright, so that is 30 breeding trays changed for me. So, here they all are, the ones that I changed out. Some of them are borderline too dry. I leave my breeding trays in for 48 hours. I could probably get away with 36 or 24, but I've always done it 48. I like doing it 48. It works for me. I don't recommend over 48 because you run into the issue that I am with some of them end up a little bit dried out on top. None of these look too far gone that they're not savable. Some of them are absolutely packed with eggs. So I'm going to show you a close-up of those, and then I will show you how I spray them down before they go into the incubators. Because we do 48 hours, spraying them down is absolutely essential. But again, it's a little bit of an art and not a science in terms of how much water is too much and how much is not enough. But first, let me show you the eggs. Because if you put the breeding trays in there and nothing comes out, what do we even do it for, right? So let me show you what some of these look like. Alright, so like I said, some of these are absolutely loaded. So if you look at this one, I mean, this is pretty dry on top, but if I mess around, like, we're pretty good on the inside there, but we are just absolutely loaded with eggs on this one. See them in there? And like I said, usually when you can see them on top like this, you know that you are very, very thick underneath and you can't see it. So those ones look really good. Like I said, some of these guys got a little bit too dry, but we are pretty full of eggs. So again, this one looks pretty good. Excuse my finger out of there. Full of eggs. So that's a pretty good sign. Pretty good sign. So this is what they look like coming out after 48 hours. Now, one thing that I definitely should note though, if you can't see eggs on top like that, that doesn't mean that they're not there. I mean, it's an indicator that you definitely have them, but just because they're not there and they're not visible on top doesn't mean that they're not there. So don't feel bad if you don't see eggs on the top on your first round or on any round. It just could mean that you left yours in there for a shorter amount of time, and so they're not quite as flush with eggs. Could be a lot of reasons. Anyways, if you are at all in question on whether they have eggs in them or not, go ahead and do what I did, where I stuck my finger in there. You're really not going to hurt them. They have a pretty tough film that would actually surprise you. Makes a little popping sound if you pop one. I recommend you try it at some point so you know. So you're really not going to do too much damage if you do what I did, and it will help set your mind at ease. The other way, I like to take a little knife and cut a little section and pull it out and make sure that I see eggs in there. If you don't see eggs in there, you wasted your time. Either you were too early, you were too late, or you don't really have that many crickets in your bins. All things that have happened to me. So something to look at. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what we do for spraying them down and then putting them in incubators. Alright, I'm going to show you what we do to spray them. I'm going to get my breeding substrate out of the way first. Bear with me. So, what I use, this is just a hand sprayer that I bought at the local hardware store, farm store. Can't remember where I bought it. Do not reuse one that you have used other chemicals in. I know that might seem like an obvious duh, like of course I wasn't going to do that, but I just need to say it just in case. So this one never had anything but water in it. It's a hand pump, so I'm going to go ahead and pump it up. It's just got a little spray nozzle. It works quite well. I used to use like a little spray bottle, but like as I grew, that was a lot of work. Get yourself one of these. Saves a lot of time, saves a lot of effort. I mean, that was a really good forearm workout, but I don't need to be spraying that bottle all the time. So, all right. And then all we do is we just, we fix the sprayer so that it is the right direction and we don't spray things we don't want to spray. And then we just give them a little spritz. It doesn't take much. So this is one of those that I stuck my finger in that, you know, it was quite light brown when I showed you and when I stuck my finger in. So I just gave it a little spray down. This will soak in. There's not going to be any standing water because that's definitely not what we want, but it gave it enough moisture that when we put it in the incubator, we're not going to have to worry about it drying out, at least for a few days. My humidity is pretty high in here right now. It's not something that I'm really controlling too terribly close because it's not a problem. So yeah, so you see it, it's soaked in. It's kind of back to the same color as when we first put the breeding trays into the bins. So not too much water, not too little, just give it a little soak. I'm gonna go ahead and spray down the rest of these and then we'll do the incubators.
So it bears repeating, do not overdo this. It's almost riskier to overdo it. It's harder to reverse that than to underdo it. Go ahead and spray one round, let it soak in, and if you need another, then go back.
All right, everything's sprayed down, so it's time to build an incubator. Not complicated. I'll show you how. All right, let's make an incubator. So, I have an 18-gallon tote. This is 18 gallons. I think I bought it at Walmart. The top is lined with packing tape. You can do that, but truthfully it's not going to keep the pinheads from crawling out. They can crawl out of anything. The first layer that I put in the bottom is just 2 sheets of paper towel. This takes care of any excess moisture issues that you have in general. Now if you have a really big excess moisture problem with your incubators, this isn't going to cut it. But this does help. The other thing that it does is once the babies start to hatch, this gives you a little bit of additional surface area so that you don't have quite as bad of a carpeting problem if you're not paying attention. So this can give you a few extra hours without a bunch of dead babies. hurdy here first. So 2 paper towels go on the bottom. So this is what the bottom looks like now. And then 1 full and 1/2 egg flat. And I just lay these in the bottom as well. Like so. So I have 30 total breeding trays. I'm only going to put 10 breeding trays in an incubator. So I put together 2 other incubators down there that the rest of them will go in. Basically all I'm going to do is stack 10 breeding trays in this tub. Not on top of each other, so not like this. You don't want to do that. More like this, and kind of balance them. If you need to use another egg flat to kind of work as scaffolding, you can do that too. So I'm going to stick 10 of these in here. And I'll show you what they look like after I have them stacked. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. Alright, I'm done. Let me show you. See? Kind of offset in the stack. Probably could have used another egg flat for scaffolding, but this will work. I'm not going to put a top on it. I'm going to stick it on that shelf because, like I said, if I put a top on it, I will end up with an excess moisture problem. So it just means I just need to keep an eye on things. If they start to look a little bit dried out, I'll give them another little spritz midway through incubation. The last thing I need to do with this, though, is I need to take my handy dandy masking tape and write today's date on it so that I kind of know where I'm at. I can tell by what the egg looks like about how long we have until they're hatching. But it's always good to do it this way, just because. So that's the incubator. I'm gonna go put the rest of them in the other ones, and then we'll wrap up.
In retrospect, I really should have used an extra half flat as scaffolding in all of these. They're pretty unstable. I'll probably go back through and redo all of them because it's just better that way.
Alright, so those guys there, well, those 2 are 11/11s, but these guys are 11/13s. Those guys will incubate for about 11 days before they start hatching, and we start everything over. This is round 3 for these guys, so probably could have harvested them today, but I'm gonna wait till Monday. So we'll go this round with them. The 2 racks at the back there, we're a few days behind. So I will change their breeding trays out tomorrow and then probably harvest those on, probably not until Thursday of next week. So that pretty much sums up everything mechanically on breeding and incubation, honestly. The only other thing with the incubation is, like, I'll probably need to come in and check those, like I said, because I'm doing them topless. So there's no tops on those because I don't want a condensation issue, which at current humidity levels, like, I would have a condensation issue if I put a top on that, even though there's ventilation in the top. So gonna have to keep a nice little eye on those guys. But other than that, it'll be about 11 days, and then we'll have baby crickets. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys in terms of going a little bit more in depth of breeding, from signs that it's time to breed, to putting together breeding trays, to breeding substrate, to building incubators, all of the things. So, if you have any other questions about breeding, incubating, whatever, please feel free to drop them in the comments and I will get back to you as quickly as possible. And if it needs another video, happy to do that as well. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for being here. And do me a big solid. If you're not already subscribed, please do that. Like, comment, share, all of those things help this entrepreneur out to reaching more people and helping more people grow crickets for whatever reason you're growing them. So thanks for being here. Please share it with your friends. And any questions you have, happy to answer them. Thanks, guys.